Okay, welcome back. We are still on the heart, and we're going to take a look at some of the important layers of the heart. So, the wall of the heart is three main layers: an epicardium, myocardium, and an endocardium. And the one that you may be a little bit familiar with is number two, which is the myocardium. This is the muscle of the heart. And you may have heard of a condition called myocarditis, which is when there's thickening or inflammation of the walls of the myocardium. And whenever the thickening of the myocardium happens, the lumen or the atrium get much, much, much smaller. The smaller the chamber, the more rapid or faster the heart has to beat to eject the blood out to the body. So what we're doing here is we're taking a section of the heart here and we're going to blow it up and look at it here. So the inner part we see is the endocardium, and the outer part is the pericardium or epicardium. It actually has some different names here. So the outer portion right here is the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. Then we have a visceral layer of the serous pericardium, right? So the serous layer, or I should say the visceral layer, is closest to the organ, whereas the parietal layer kind of is on the wall, like the chest wall. Okay. Now this visceral layer of the serous pericardium is also referred to as the epicardium. Okay, so that one has two different names. The endocardium, if you look at the endocardium, this is where we're going to see some of these hills, which are extensions off of the heart muscle. You're going to see these terms, trabecula carne and papilla, or not papilla, you'll see papillary muscles. Papillary muscles. So these are going to be connected to each other, and I'll show you in a picture. We can see a little bit here. So here's the myocardium, but you see these little hills, like that little mountain there and that little mountain there. Okay, so those are called papillary muscles. Those are called papillary muscles. And then there's an extension from the papillary muscles to the valve. And you see these cords, these tendons. These cord-like tendons are called chordae tendineae. So chordae tendineae, papillary, and trabecula carne, these three are all interconnected because the papillary muscles are an extension of the trabecula carne, and then the papillary muscles attach to the valves by way of the chordae tendineae, these cord-like tendons. So now let's go and figure out, well, how do we get these, how do we get the parietal layer and how do we get the visceral layer of the pericardium? So here's the heart, and let's say this is a balloon. Think of this as a balloon. So here's the balloon, and inside is a cavity. When the heart presses into the balloon, it's going to form one, two layers. As it goes all the way in, we can see the layer that connects to the heart right here. That's the visceral layer of the pericardium. And the layer on the outside is the parietal layer of the pericardium. Okay, now this concept was probably taught in A&P 1, where there was a visceral layer and parietal layer around the heart, around the lungs, and around the digestive tract. When it was around the lungs, we just called it a visceral and parietal pericardium. When it was around the lungs, we called it a visceral and parietal pleura, parietal pleura and visceral pleura. When it was around the digestive tract, it was the visceral and parietal peritoneum. So the heart is surrounded by a group of membranes collectively known as the pericardium. There's a fibrous pericardium, and then there's a serous pericardium. And remember, the serous pericardium has the visceral and parietal layer to it. So when we look again, we can see the fibrous pericardium is all the way here on the outside. And then we're going to have a parietal layer and visceral layer of the serous pericardium. And in between the two, that's the pericardial cavity. Now the thickest layer from here to here, that's the myocardium. The innermost, that's the endocardium. The extension of the muscle into the inner part of the heart, that's called the trabecula carne. The trabecula carne. It's going to give the musculature this very like spaghetti-like appearance. Okay, so the fibrous pericardium, that outermost layer, it's pretty tough. It's tough, inelastic connective tissue. And it's going to protect the heart. It's going to anchor it into its normal position. So when it is beating aggressively, it's anchored. And it also prevents it from over distension. The serous pericardium, remember, has the parietal layer and the visceral layer. And it's the parietal layer that produces the pericardial fluid. And the purpose of the pericardial fluid, remember, muscles contract, they generate heat. It's going to be designed to cool off the heart. And the visceral layer, that visceral layer of the serous pericardium, is also referred to as the epicardium. So what's the function of that pericardial fluid? Well, it cools off or helps dissipate heat from the heart. It's going to lubricate it and protect and cushion the heart. And it's involved in small amounts of substance exchange between the heart and the pericardial fluid, like ions for muscle contraction and lactic acid. Now, the myocardium, we know, is the thickest layer of the heart, and it acts as a functional syncytium or syncytium. When you see the word functional syncytium or syncytium, we see the word in sync. The heart has to function in sync. What do we mean by that? Well, this brings into play the electrical conduction system of the heart when the heart functions in sync, because both atrium have to contract at the exact same time, and then both ventricles have to contract at the exact same time. Okay, and the reason this happens is in part by the electrical conduction system of the heart, where we have a pacemaker, which is number one, which is sending this electrical current super fast to both right atrium and left atrium. And remember, if this is a heart cell, and then here's the next heart cell, and we know these heart cells are highly branched, each cell is connected by a junction. And these junctions here are called gap junctions. And gap junctions are designed for fast, rapid forms of communication, so that as quickly as this heart cell, maybe right here, gets the electrical message, the heart cell right here gets the message at the exact same time, so both chambers know to contract in sync, a functional syncytium. These lines in between these heart cells, if you remember, they're called intercalated discs. Those intercalated discs. Now, when the information is relayed to both atrium at the exact same time, the electrical signal is going to be relayed to the AV node, number 2, which is the atrioventricular node. This atrioventricular node is going to send the electrical current in this interventricular septum. Notice that this muscular wall is nice and thick, and it's hiding the electrical wiring of the heart. Now, it does so for a reason. Remember, in a previous video, I said that the atriums contract from superior to inferior, and that's because the blood has to go from the atrium into the ventricles. But how do the ventricles contract? Remember, the ventricles contract from inferior to superior, which means that we need to hide the electrical activity in the musculature in that interventricular septum, which is this muscular wall between both ventricles. This pink musculature is called the interventricular septum. Septum means wall, like nasal septum. It's a wall. So the electrical current after the AV node, number 3, right here, it's called a bundle of His. And the bundle of His then divides into a bundle branch, a left bundle branch and a right bundle branch. And again, these branches are hidden in the myocardium until it gets to the very end where we have Purkinje fibers. Now that the electrical current has made it to the apex of the heart and then branched out into all these Purkinje fibers, now the end of the heart, or the apex, and all of this musculature has reached or received its electrical conduction. Now the ventricles can contract efficiently, pushing blood from inferior to superior. So this network, this design of the electrical conduction system of the heart is done in such a way so that it's hiding the wires till it gets down to the bottom, so it can contract from inferior to superior, so that this valve can shut when it pushes up and this valve can open. Pretty neat. I'll go over this again when we talk about the EKG, the electrocardiograph, because when we look at the EKG, it's actually measuring the waves going through this conduction system. So what I had said before was that the heart muscle itself, if we look at it, the myocardium is highly branched. And that what connects one cardiomyocyte to the other are these intercalated discs. If we pull those discs apart, we would see this. And in between, if we separate them right in between, that's where we have these gap junctions, which is used for fast, rapid forms of spreading the electrical conduction system from one heart cell to the other so the heart can contract in sync. Lots of mitochondria in the heart because we need lots of ATP to keep that heart beating. Remember, in the atrium, we have pectinate muscles, and in the ventricles, we have trabecular carne muscles. Now, I'm going to go back because I want to go over this concept again, okay? So we finished with the functional syncytium. I'd like to come back to this and talk about the heart muscle in a little bit more detail, okay?